Today I want to take a deep dive into the nature of time, decisions, and ego. And this is not a random list of topics. As you'll soon see, time, decisions, and ego have so much to do with each other that you can't really understand one without the others. My name is Rick Astor. I am the shamanic economist, which means time, decisions, and ego are the kinds of things I talk about every day. So let's start with time. The basic thing, or one of the most basic things we can all agree on about time, is this idea of before and after, past and future. This is built into our language. We have past tense, future tense, and present tense. So we all agree that there's this difference between before and after, or between past and future. But what is this difference? Well, it's most evident when you come to a decision, because with a decision, you're deciding in the present, but all your information is from the past. All of the information you have is based in the past. You don't have any actual information from the present, and you're only guessing about the future. But all the consequences of your decision take place in the future. And when you look at this, in a way, it doesn't seem fair. It's like all the information is from over here, and all the impact is over here. How are you supposed to make this decision at all? Well, we come to the present, and this is the nature of the present. The present is most fundamentally the time for making decisions. But the present is incredibly hard to nail down. It's like one of the most basic questions about the present would be, how long is the present? And if you're in physics or if you're in philosophy, you would say, well, this isn't even a proper question. It's not a well-formed question because duration is not a concept that applies to the present. The present is, in a way, it's so small that it doesn't have a duration. In other words, no matter how small you try to slice time, the present is smaller still. But look at it another way, and the present never ends. There's no end to the present. People talk about the eternal present or the ever unfolding present, the perpetual present, where no matter how long you wait for the present to end, you're still in the present. So there's this paradox about the present. It's so small that you can't measure it, and so eternal, perpetual, that you can't put bounds on it. And yet this is where we make our decisions, okay? So that's to say the present is so small you can't measure it is perfectly good for physics, it's good for philosophy, but if we have actual decisions to make, we need a container to make them in. So we need the present to be a certain length of time. And this is where the ego comes in. The purpose of the ego in this context is to have this container for you to make your decisions. If there's a collective decision, then there's got to be a collective ego in order to have that container for the decision to be made. So if you have a committee meeting, it's in a room, but it's in a room for a certain period of time. Maybe it's an hour, let's say. And whatever decisions are being made, you treat that entire hour as the present. And let's say you're in a dressing room and you're trying on clothes and you have to decide whether they fit or not. You're going to treat the entire time that you're in the dressing room as the present. So as this pragmatic way of looking at it, when we have a decision to make, we want to box out some time to make that decision. And we can't use the philosophical or physical understanding of the present because decisions do take time. There is no such thing as a snap decision. we can have the illusion of a snap decision, but even that took some time to arrive at. So with any decision, there is some container of the present that allows you to freeze time in order to make this decision. But wait, time does not freeze, does it? So we have this illusion. It's only an illusion that time freezes. And where does the illusion come from? Well, that is where the ego comes in. And some psychologists have said that this is the most important function of the ego, to freeze time so that we can make decisions. And as we'll get to later, there's some spiritual reason to accept this as the function of the ego also. So we're making decisions, and we have this illusion of the present. We have this illusion that the present is this period of time in which we can make the decision uninterrupted. Now, one of the downfalls of this, and one of the reasons we know it's an illusion, is that we get interrupted in the middle of a decision. It's like if you're trying on clothes and someone says, how long are you going to be in there? And then we're reminded that we are actually taking up some time making these decisions about the clothes we might or might not buy. It's the same with every decision, but a lot of decisions are more dynamic than trying on clothes. If you're trying on clothes, the clothes are going to stay the same, and your physical body is going to stay relatively the same for the entire time that you're thinking about it. But for a lot of things, the world keeps moving, and you're making decisions about things that are in motion in a meaningful way. So it's okay to go ahead and make this illusion of the present, but if you go too far with it, the decision you come to is obsolete before you even arrive at it, because circumstances have already changed. And also, you can miss things. I mean, when you pretend the time has stopped, you're missing all the action that's going on around you. That's a problem in itself. So you don't want to take too much time with your decisions. You want to create this illusion of the present, but you want to keep it as small as you reasonably can, so that you're not creating this ridiculous illusion, and so that you're not isolating yourself from all the action in the world for too long, and then so that you're not making these obsolete decisions. So let's get back to the ego. The ego creates this illusion of the present, and I can't even quite explain how it does this, but it does this by your sense of self, your sense of being separate from the context that you're in or from your environment. So your sense of self is distorted enough, it has enough distortion that you believe that time stops because you decided time was going to stop. And I talked about not stretching the illusion of the present too much, but you can see the danger of having this power over time. You command time to stop and it stops, and you make your decision, and then time starts again. Well, that's the illusion. That's the way we all experience it, but that is not the actual physical nature of the universe. You remember in physics, there is no place for this illusion of the present, and motion is happening at all times. The universe is constantly in motion. And what that means in physics is that other particles are arriving where you are, other things are arriving where you are, and they may disrupt what you're trying to do with your decision. So we've got this illusion of the present, we've got this power to stop time, and it's just important not to abuse this power. So what is the nature of this illusion of the present, this present that we're in as we're making a decision? I like to describe this as a state of suspense, where you're separated from the past, you're separated from the future. You've made time stop so that you can have a look at things, try to get to an understanding of things. And that's where the decisions are made. Well, the problem with a state of suspense is that there's no action in it. Your power comes from taking action. It doesn't come from the decisions themselves. And so if you make time stop for a long time, you're giving up your power. And so a lot of the problems that we talk about with ego are related to this power to stop time and taking it too far. And just to illustrate this, let me talk about relationships. When we have ego problems in relationships, it usually comes from assuming that the person that we're in a relationship with is staying the same while we are adapting to them. And that is actually never true. They are also changing at the same time that we're changing. And so when we come to them and say, well, I thought you would stay the same while I figured this out, obviously that doesn't go well. And that's the kind of thing that gives ego a bad name. So if you want to stay out of ego trouble, the way to do this is by understanding this illusion of the present and not overdoing it. And we use the illusion of the present not just for decisions, but also for certain kind of actions. Like if I say I'm going to go clean the kitchen, well, I use this same illusion of the present and I box out a period of time for cleaning the kitchen. And I just pretend that the world isn't doing anything at all while I'm cleaning the kitchen. And then when I'm done, I'll check and see how the world is. So there is this potential for action in the illusion of the present. But if we're making decisions, there is no action to speak of in the decisions. We're just getting a perspective on things, coming to a balance, considering, predicting. It's all thought work. It's not action. So this is not just an incidental property of the ego. It is actually the core nature of the ego. In other words, if we didn't have to make decisions, we wouldn't need an ego. Now, a lot of psychologists are going to tell you that the purpose of the ego is to protect your identity, to protect you. And this is true, of course, but this is closely connected to this illusion of the present. In other words, how do you protect yourself in a material sense? It's the result of making the right decisions. In other words, if there's a situation that calls for you to remove yourself from a specific area because of the rapid movement of things, that's a decision, and you go into this illusion of the present to make this decision, and then you take the action. So wherever the ego is doing anything, this illusion of the present is part of that. So let me go into the spiritual side of this now, because this really gets at why the ego is so spiritually important. Because spiritual experience has to do with time. Any occasion where we're getting out of the flow of time is a spiritual experience. When we talk about immortality, that's a spiritual concept. When we talk about the immortal present, that's a spiritual concept. But when we talk about freezing time, we're talking about getting out of the flow of time. And this is the core purpose of the ego. So we're getting out of the flow of time to get our definitive perspective on a subject in order to make a decision. That's what the ego does for us, but that means that the ego is fundamentally a spiritual part of ourselves. It's a component that's more spiritual than most of our components because it has this power to stop time, to get us out of the flow of time. And you can say, well, that's just an illusion, but if something is happening in your experience, and this illusion of the present is definitely in our experience, we experience time stopping and we experience ourselves making decisions, and then we experience ourselves taking action on those decisions. So this illusion of the present is part of our experience. So there is something real about it. There is something real about the way the ego stops time, gets us out of the flow of time, and allows us to get this larger perspective on a specific narrow topic. So I would even go so far to say as the ego is our all day long regular connection to spirit, that it is what continually connects us to this timeless state every time we make a decision, and sometimes when we aren't even making a decision, when we want to get a detailed perspective of something, even if we're just sitting and reading a book, that is still the illusion of the present, and we're still getting out of the flow of time, and that is still the ego at work. So this is a surprising concept. I know it surprised me when I came across it, that the ego is in at the ground level when it comes to anything spiritual. And what's so surprising about this is that so many people are talking about overcoming the ego in order to be spiritual. And, now that I understand this function of the ego, I have to say it just doesn't work that way. You don't stay bounded by the flow of time and have a spiritual experience. Your spiritual experience comes from escaping from the flow of time in one way or another. And you don't do that escape without ego there with you. In other words, without the ego, that would be impossible. So let's talk about meditation, for example. Meditation is something you create a container for. You might say, I'm going to sit down and meditate for 7 minutes. So there's your present. That's your illusion of the present. You're basically saying the world is going to stop for 7 minutes. Time stops, and I'm going to do this 7-minute meditation. So how does time stop? Well, that's the same illusion of the present that the ego creates for anything else. Ego is what creates this container that allows the meditation to happen. See, without the ego, there really is no meditation. And I use this example because so many people agree that meditation is one of the most basic ways to gain a spiritual presence. So when you understand that even meditation does not exist without ego, then you can start to see how fundamental the ego is to the spiritual experience. So this was a lot, so let me go over it again. Time has a lot of qualities, but the most basic are these before and after, and we call it past and future when we're looking at it from where we are. And the present is some indefinable period between the past and the future. But we need to make decisions in the present, and the present in physical terms is too small to make a decision, so we stretch it out, and it's the ego that does that stretching out. It creates this illusion of the present, which is the illusion that the world has stopped, that time has stopped, and that you're free to do whatever you want to do outside of the bounds of time. So that's time and ego, and the most important thing we do when we get into this illusion of the present is make these decisions. So, one last thought about decisions. Decisions are the way we choose our path in life. The spiritual metaphor is you're walking on a dirt road in a forest, probably, right? And the road goes off this way or it goes off this way. You have to decide which way you want to go. You can't go both ways. So it's a fork in the road. You have to decide. It's a perfect moment for the ego. You probably actually stop walking and you look to the left and you look to the right and you say, which one is better? And you make a decision and then you go. So you're choosing your path, and the path could be literal, but mostly it's this metaphor we have for our experience in life. And the path is, to my mind, one of the most spiritual concepts we have. We find our way through life for purposes that we don't fully understand, but we know it has something to do with experiencing a lot of things. And we experience these things as a result of what? Well, this is a result of the decisions we make about which path to take. And there's the ego again. The ego has this fundamental role in every decision we make. So when we talk about our spiritual path, we can't talk about that either without recognizing the role of the ego in directing us along the path. So that's time, decisions, and ego. I hope you can see how closely connected they are. And I hope you'll give your ego some credit for its fundamental role in your decisions and your spiritual life.